Hello, my name is Mary and I am the designer behind Maiden Mary Designs. And in this video, I'm going to show you a step-by-step tutorial of how to sew the Rosie Utility Suit. Before we get started on the construction steps and jumping into sewing, it's very important to read the Sew a Toile page on page 6 of the instructions and read through some of the adjustment steps first to be able to apply any of the fit adjustments needed, because this is a woven garment. It's more of a fitted style jumpsuit. It's important to get the height right. So there are specific step-by-step instructions on how to adjust the height, taller or shorter as needed, how to apply a full bust adjustment, and it's important to sew toile first to be able to make those adjustments and changes so that you're confident it will fit once you invest the time into making the final garment. This is a great project to take slowly, enjoy the process, and really take the time to invest in the details, because there are a lot of top stitching and small details in this pattern that make it really special.
Starting with the front shirt, fold along the dart line, pin in place with the pins on the dart line and make sure that it is aligned on the front and back side. Sew along the dart in line with the chalk and shorten the stitch length at the point. Do not backstitch, leave a long tail of thread, then tie off the end by hand. Using a high steam setting, press the dart down toward the waist. Place front shirt on back shirt with right sides together. Pin the shoulder seams and the side seam in place. Start pinning in the upper armpit and carefully ease in the curve through the side bust and down to the waist, making sure that the front matches the back. Sew with a 1 cm or 3/8 inch seam allowance, then use a zigzag stitch or a serger to finish the raw edges. Press the seam allowance toward the back shirt for both the shoulder seam and the side seams. Finish the raw edge of the center front of the shirt using a zigzag stitch or a serger. Using an extra short stitch length, stitch 6 mm or 1/4 inch from the edge of the neckline. Fold up the hem of the sleeve 1 cm or 3/8 inch with the wrong sides together and press, then fold again 4.5 cm or 1 inch and 3/4 and press. Unfold, then fold in half for the side seam, pin in place, and sew with a 1 cm or 3/8 inch seam allowance down to the bottom. Finish the raw edge with a zigzag stitch or on a serger. Press the seam allowance toward the back of the sleeve. Turn the sleeve right side out and use the notches to align the sleeve with the arm side. Match the double notches in the back to the double notches and the single notch in the front. Pin the shoulder seam to the center notch and ease in the sleeve cap between the notches. Align the underarm seams. Pin with a 1 cm or 3/8 inch seam allowance to ensure that that underarm seam is aligned. Start sewing at the underarm seam to make sure that the two seams stay aligned with stitching there first. Sew around the armhole with a 1 cm or 3/8 inch seam allowance. Sew slowly around the armhole, adjusting the fabric as needed to make sure that you don't get any pinches or gathering in the fabric. Finish the raw edge using a zigzag stitch or on a serger. We're going to attach bias binding to the top edge of the front pant pocket. Use the diagonal as a reference for cutting your bias binding. You can cut it extra long because we will be trimming the excess length. Open up the top fold of the bias binding and pin to the pocket. Be sure that you keep the bottom fold of the bias binding folded as you pin it. Then repeat on the second pocket. This is how your two pockets should look with the bias binding pinned in place. Sew the bias binding with a 6 mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance along the top edge and the straight edge of the front pant pocket. At the top corner, 6 mm or 1/4 inch before the end of the fabric, lower the needle and raise the presser foot, rotate the fabric around the needle, then continue stitching down the straight edge. Trim the excess bias binding, and this is how the corner of your pocket should look. Also trim the corner excess seam allowance, and on the other end of the pocket, trim the excess bias binding. Turn the binding of the front pant pocket right side out. We're going to use a pointy but not sharp object to turn that corner neatly right side out and press the seam of the bias binding. Now both sides of the fold of the bias binding should be folded within the bias binding so that as we stitch it in place, all of the raw edges will be enclosed. Fold the long side of the pocket 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch and press. Then fold the bottom of the pocket 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch and press. Fold the corner neatly so that the two edges are angled and that frayed fabric won't poke out when the pocket is stitched in place. This is how the back of your front pant pocket should look. We're going to switch over to our contrasting top stitch thread and then sew 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch from the top of the pocket. Check the back side of the pocket to make sure that the bias binding has been stitched in place. Align the 3 corners of the front pant pocket with the notches on the front pant. Place the pocket 1 centimeter down from the notch at the waistband. Edge stitch around the 2 straight edges of the front pant pocket using the contrasting top stitch thread. Stitch 1/16 of an inch or 1 millimeter from the edge of the pocket. At the corner, lower the needle, raise the presser foot, and rotate the fabric around the needle, then continue sewing. Sew a second row of top stitch 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch from the edge of the pocket. Prep the shirt pocket by folding the sides and the bottom of the pocket 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch with wrong sides together. Next, fold the top down 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch and press. Then fold 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch and press. Using our contrasting top stitch thread, we will sew 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch from the top of the pocket, and at the ends, back tack well. Using the back pocket pattern piece, trace the M logo onto the pocket, then top stitch the M using contrasting top stitch thread. Make sure that the M is mirrored on the 2 pockets, and when you are stitching in the corners, lower the needle into the fabric, raise the presser foot, and rotate the fabric around the needle. Fold the sides and the bottom of the back pant pocket 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch and press. Then fold the top down 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch and press. Fold a second time 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 inch and press. Top stitch 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch from the top of the pocket. Be sure to back tack well at both the beginning and the end. Fold the sleeve hem up 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch with the wrong sides together and press. Then fold again 4.5 centimeters or 1 inch and 3/4 and press, then pin the sleeve hem in place. Top stitch 4 centimeters or 1.5 inches from the end of the sleeve. Pin the shirt pocket to the front shirt and first edge stitch with the contrasting top stitch thread, then top stitch 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch from the edge of the pocket. Pin the back pant pocket to the back pant, first edge stitch around the edge of the pocket, then top stitch at 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch from the edge of the pocket, back tack well at the beginning and end of every top stitch. Switch to your matching thread, sew a basting stitch 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch from the edge of the front pant pocket, closing the pocket on the front pant. Pin the front pant to the back pant at both the side seam and the inseam. Sew with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch seam allowance, then finish the raw edges with a zigzag stitch or on a serger, and press the seams toward the back pant. Turn one pant leg right side out and insert into the inside out pant leg. Pin right sides together along the center seam and sew with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch seam allowance. Be sure to stop at the zipper notch on the front pant. Finish the raw edge with a zigzag stitch or on a serger, then turn the pant leg right side out and press the seam. Pin the shirt to the pants, align the center notch of the shirt to the center seam of the pants, and match the side seams of the shirt to the pants. Pin around the waist, then sew with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch seam allowance. After sewing the shirt to the pants, finish the raw edge with a zigzag stitch or on a serger, then press the seam allowance up toward the shirt. Fold the waist tab in half the long way and sew 2 sides, leaving one of the small ends open. Cut the corner and trim the seam allowance, then turn the waist tab right side out and press. Fold the raw open end inside of the waist tab by 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch, press and pin. On the sewn end of the waist tab, measure 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 inch from the end and make a mark. This will be the beginning point of your buttonhole. Use your button and follow your machine's guidance to sew a buttonhole onto the waist tab. Place a pin at each end of the buttonhole and use a seam ripper to open the center of the buttonhole. The pins will help to prevent from seam ripping through the end stitches of the buttonhole. Switch to contrasting top stitch thread. Edge stitch a border around all 4 sides of the waist tab, 1 millimeter or 1/16 of an inch from the edge of the fabric. Draw a 3 by 3 centimeter square or 1 1/8 inch using chalk at the opposite end of the waist tab. Draw an X in the center. On your utility suit, top stitch 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch above the waist seam, securing the seam allowance to the shirt. Pin the end of the waist tab with an X to the back shirt at the waist tab mark. The top stitching of the waist tab should be in line with the top stitching on the waist seam. First, top stitch around the square, then stitch the X in the center, all in one continuous stitch. To rotate around the corners, lower the needle into the fabric, raise the presser foot, and rotate the fabric around the needle. You will need to do this all the way around the square and then again rotating around the X. When you reach the end of the X, sew one last stitch on the edge of the square to secure the waist tab, then back tack well. Cut the center line of the zipper facing, then draw a 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch squared border around the end of the zipper opening. Pin the wrong side of the zipper facing to the right side of the utility suit. Sew the facing with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch seam allowance using your matching thread. 1 centimeter before reaching the corner at the bottom of the zipper opening, use an extra short stitch length to sew over the drawn square. Sink the needle at the corner, rotate the fabric around the needle, then continue sewing across the extra short stitch length. Rotate the fabric again at the second corner and continue sewing until you reach the end of the zipper facing at the neckline. At the bottom of the zipper opening, insert pins to protect the corner stitches and snip the corner at a 45-degree angle, avoiding the stitches. Trim the 2 layers of the seam allowance down to 5 millimeters or 3/16 of an inch around the entire zipper opening. Be very careful and take this step slowly to be sure not to cut into the utility suit or to snip any of the stitches. Turn the utility suit inside out, then turn the zipper facing to the wrong side of the utility suit fabric. Press the zipper facing with a high steam setting. Roll the facing seam slightly to the wrong side of the utility suit fabric. so that you can see the main side of the utility suit fabric on the inside of the utility suit. Make sure that the corners are pressed nice and neat so that the appearance from the outside will be a clean finish. Turn the utility suit right side out. Place your zipper in the zipper opening with the stopper at the top of the zipper 1 centimeter below the neckline. Mark the bottom of the zipper opening on the zipper tape, then cut the zipper 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch below the mark so that you have a seam allowance at the bottom of your zipper. Use pliers to pinch off the zipper teeth below the mark. This will create your 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch of seam allowance. Trim any of the frayed threads of the zipper tape and apply some fray check if needed. Now, to place the zipper in the zipper opening, you will need to precisely align the last zipper tooth a scant below the opening of the utility suit. Be sure that the zipper is centered in the opening. The opening is 2 centimeters wide, so be sure that there's 1 centimeter on either side from the center point of the zipper teeth and pin along both sides of the zipper. Carefully pin the waist seam so that the top stitching aligns from the left to the right side. Use a hand needle and thread and hand baste the zipper in place to the utility suit. This doesn't need to look nice, but it does need to be neat and precise because this will be holding it in place for your top stitching. Carefully turn the utility suit inside out. The zipper tape beyond the last zipper tooth should measure 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch. Fold the sides of the zipper facing 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch and press. Then fold a second time, wrapping the fabric around the zipper tape 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch and press again. Pin the facing in place from the outside of the utility suit. Repeat these steps on the opposite side of the zipper facing. Double fold the end of the zipper facing up 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch. Then pin on the inside to hold in place and pin again from the outside to do the top stitching. Remove the inside pins. Turn the utility suit right side out and use chalk to draw a 6 millimeter or 1/4 inch squared border around the end of the zipper opening.
If you haven't taken a break in a while, now would be a good time to do it. The next series of steps is going to be working through the zipper top stitching, and it's a good step to take slowly and to work precisely through the double row of top stitches to make sure you get a good clean finish. So go ahead and pause the video and take a break, and then when you're ready to get back to it, we'll do the zipper top stitching.
Using contrasting top stitch thread, edge stitch 1 millimeter or 1/16 of an inch from the edge of the utility suit fabric around the entire zipper opening from collar to collar. The waist seam can get bulky, so I like to use the hand wheel to turn the needle over the waist seam, then continue sewing. For neat corners, use an extra short stitch length at the bottom of the zipper. Sink the needle at the corner, raise the presser foot, and rotate the fabric around the needle. Continue sewing with the extra short stitch length across the bottom of the zipper. Be very careful not to sew into the zipper tooth at the bottom of that zipper opening. You can use the hand wheel to slowly work across this part of the zipper tape. At the other side of the corner, sink the needle, rotate the fabric around the needle, and continue edge stitching along the side of the zipper up until the neckline. Top stitch a second row around the entire zipper, 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch from the edge of the utility suit fabric. Use the drawn seam allowance that you drew in chalk as a guide around the squared end of the zipper. Go extra slow on this step for clean and precise top stitching. Remove all of the hand sewn basting stitches. Trim the excess zipper tape at the top of the zipper in line with the neckline. Iron fusible interfacing to the wrong side of one of the collar pieces. Use a high steam setting and hold the iron in place for 15 seconds before moving. Repeat until the whole collar is adhered to the interfacing. With right sides together, pin the two collar pieces and sew the collar with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance using matching thread. To sew around the corners, sink the needle at the corner, raise the presser foot, and rotate the fabric around the corner. Then continue sewing. Snip the corners of the seam allowance, avoiding the stitches. Turn the collar right side out and use a pen or a chopstick to help get those corners nice and pointy. Then press the edges of the collar, pushing out the seam allowance as much as possible to get a good crisp press on the edges. Fold the raw edge of the non-interfaced layer of the collar into the collar 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch and press. Pin the interfaced layer of the collar to the neckline of the utility suit with right sides together. Align the center notch of the collar to the center notch of the back shirt. Pin the end of the collar in line with the edge of the zipper tape. Sew around the collar using a 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch seam allowance. Go slow and adjust the fabric as needed to make sure that there is no pinching or creasing in the fabric. To sew as close as possible to the end of the zipper tape, unfold the collar, moving the non-interfaced side of the collar closer toward you, and sew all the way into that seam line and back tack well. Press the seam allowance up into the collar. On the non-interfaced side of the collar, fold the pre-pressed seam allowance into the collar and pin in place. The end of the collar should wrap around the zipper tape, enclosing all raw edges. And the folded edge of the collar should be pinned so that the edge is just in line with the previously sewn seam. Edge stitch around the collar using a 1mm or 1/16 inch seam allowance, sewing with your matching thread. Back tack well at both the beginning and the end of the collar. Now try on your utility suit and use chalk to mark a comfortable spot for one button on each side of the front of the shirt above the waist seam. These buttons will be used to hold the waist tabs in place. Cut 2 strips of bias tape 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch long and fold in the edges, then press. Pin to the inside of the utility suit at the mark for the buttonhole. This small patch is going to serve as a fabric stabilizer for when we sew our buttons on. Edge stitch around the 4 sides of the square, then we can sew on the button. Align the waist tab with the bottom top stitching seam of the waist tab on top of that waist seam top stitching. Insert the needle through the hole of the waist tab, and that will be your spot to sew on the button. Hand sew the button, making an X pattern through the 4 holes until the button is secure. Repeat with the second button on the other side of the jumpsuit. Now is a good time to sew in a tag if you would like to add one. Switch to your contrasting top stitch thread and top stitch a border around the edge of the collar 6mm or 1/4 inch from the edge. To sew around the corners, sink the needle at the corner, raise the presser foot, and rotate the fabric around the needle, then continue sewing. Back tack well at both the beginning and the end of the collar, securing the collar to the zipper tape. Be careful not to sew onto the zipper tooth. To finish the pants or shorts, fold the hem up 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch with the wrong sides together and press. Fold a second time 4.5 centimeters or 1 3/4 inches with wrong sides together and press, then pin in place. Top stitch 4 centimeters or 1.5 inches from the fold of the fabric using your contrasting top stitch thread. Beautifully done. Your Rosie Utility Suit is now complete. I hope you enjoyed the process of sewing this garment and wear it for many years to come. If you'd like to tag at Maiden Mary Designs and use the hashtag Rosie Utility Suit on Instagram, I would be overjoyed to see your finished garment.